Every pro was once an amateur, and every expert was once a beginner. Welcome to the DYA Network, where we're on a mission to bring you essential resources and cutting-edge information to help young athletes attain their maximum potential while developing the champion within. I'm your host, David Edwards, and welcome to the network. Hello, everyone, and yes, welcome to the DYA Developing Young Athletes Network that we call Network Nation, and welcome to this Monday's episode. And on today's Monday's episode, this is what I wanted to do. Back on April 23rd, I was listening part of a webinar. This is through Aspen's Institute Project Play, and one of the guests they had on there, they were dealing with, these were medical experts, and they were talking about kids need gradual return to sports after COVID-19. And you can look this up. Again, this was April 23rd through Aspen Institute Project Play. One of the guests on there name was Dr. Andrew Pearl, Hospital for Special Surgery, Chief of Sports Medicine, and New York Mets Associate Team Physician. If you listen to other episodes, we also have had a team member, one of his, Dr. DeForia, that was on our show from Hospital for Special Surgery. I'll bring up a little bit about him later in this show. But one thing that Dr. Pearl was bringing up that was important, that really stood out to me, was he talked about not rush back into sports with a deconditioned athlete. One thing he pointed out on here, and this was him speaking, is we know that most injuries occur during preseasons or early in the season. So our message is not to rush deconditioned athletes back into competition. He also pointed out, importantly, we want to make sure coaches respect a gradual return to competitive activity, especially if there are condensed preseasons. We encourage during the ramp up to increase activity about 10% each week. That stood out to me because we know right now that there's various training levels that athletes are doing right now. And some things we can control with this transition. I wanted to add into this something that can help with that also that he had pointed out, and that's screening. Screening to me is important, especially when we look at screening from this standpoint. It's just giving us a baseline, and we're looking at basic movement patterns or basic idea of movement quality for training. For example, what I like to do with athletes is let's look at their movement. Everybody knows how I am about movement, efficiency, and quality. Some things we can look at as far as their air squat, how they move through the squat. We have a video coming out this week on that, on our show, on our YouTube channel. Single leg balance, identifying any asymmetries, the calf raise, I've talked about that on show, and push-ups. Not only strength, but we're looking at what kind of core stability they have. Now, here's the thing with these type of screens. These screens are good, but they don't necessarily tell you if the athlete is at risk for injury. They are a baseline because they don't fix or tell us all of these things. We have to gather more data. We aren't experts in those areas, but we need some understanding of quality of movement as we begin to train and we begin to load and we begin to perform, because this type of training in screens, they use slow velocity and low force activities and characteristics that are not common with musculoskeletal injuries. Usually injuries occur when there's fatigue, when there's jumping and landing, and there are mechanics involved. We need to understand that also. And the other thing we have to understand is this. When we look at a basic screen, it teaches us things as far as workloads and volumes and intensities when we start to do that. If I'm looking at an athlete and they're already having some asymmetries or compensatory patterns, that's why I always say, why would we load? And when we get into those volumes or intensity levels, for example, if we're looking at them doing plyometric jumps, and I know what to look for because maybe I've seen that with that basic screen, maybe a valgus collapse of the knees, which can be another risk for ACL injuries. Those are things that these basic screens can show us. And I think this is important that as we make that transition, that we look for those things. And those of us that are at home now, parents, coaches within our organization, start to look for these things also, especially if you're doing any type of video training or you're looking at your kids, start looking for these kind of things. Like I said, on our show, we will be on our YouTube channel videos on this. Last week, we did have the athletic stance and its importance. But let me add some value to this for you so you understand. So when we start talking about movement quality, also with movement quality, we want to also look at where they are for fatigue, because he talked about being deconditioned. Let me use the example of an air squat. So if I look at a squat And I'm noticing that valgus collapse of the knees, and that's when the knees collapse inward. So if you're looking at a person straight on in the frontal, straight ahead, you're looking at them straight ahead, not frontal plane, but you're looking at them straight ahead in a sagittal, you're looking face to face. What we're looking at there, if I'm looking at their knee alignment to their hip and to their ankle, the knee is going inward. Both of them are. This is what I'm talking about, that valgus collapse that can increase the chance of injuries. And this is scientifically proven out there. This is one of the areas where we see that knee collapse, that is poor body mechanics. Now, let's say we have an athlete that I see this early. Now we're loading. Or if I look at they're doing plyometrics or they're jumping, let's look at a basketball player or a volleyball player. As coaches and parents, you see this. You got to start to look for these things. As they get tired, I'm noticing that collapse. Well, if they're doing training and things at home now before they reach that fatigue level, those are things we can look at how we can correct it. Those are things we can be proactive before us being actionary when the injury occurs. These are things within a screen, the basic screen, that can help us for the next level. Now, this is what I want to add into that is you as coaches and parents and those that work with athletes that probably already know, a lot of you that are trainers and all that listen to our show, assessing movement quality during training or practice. I think this is important, especially with a dynamic warm-up. You can see when they start getting down single limb, if they're losing control with balance. Start looking for those things, parents and coaches and trainers, because these are things that can tell us a lot. They're starting to get into more of those dynamic movement patterns, and we're trying to look at where's their neuromuscular control. During the warm-ups, we can start looking also at how are they breaking down with fatigue, if they're getting into training that we're doing. And coaches, start looking for that too if you're doing any type of video training, because I think it's important to have kids kind of show us what they're doing. So they're saying you're doing these workloads, they're doing these training, they're doing these activities on their own. Well, let me see. Send me some video footage, especially with coaches that are part of a program communicating together to say, I'm working with this group of kids and I'm working with this group of kids. How are they doing? Start keeping records and logs of this, because this is what's important, that when we reach that point where we ramp up to the seasons, once things clear, the kids can get back in activity, we have a better understanding of them as a whole. Now, I talked about earlier on this, that with the earlier point that I made with Dr. Pearl, that we had a connection through the hospital, special surgery. If you ever listened to one of our previous episodes, we had John DeForia. He's a chief of primary sports medicine surgery and director of sports medicine for the NBA. For sports medicine for the NBA, I said it again, I'm sorry, but he's also works for the hospital of special surgery. He works with a lot of athletes. He was on our show, and what we talked about was sports medicine. This was episode 128, Medicine for the Young Athlete. And the reason I'm bringing this up is that when we talked on there, listen to that episode, one thing that's important during this process is that there be communications and collaborations. Example I give you with that is this. I talked to a good friend of mine today. He's a coach. He's a scout at the collegiate. He used to be at the pro level. And we were talking about certain things and when things are going to clear up. And he's in the post because he's also a college coach now. And one thing we were talking about is that the communication with coaches that are working with different athletes within the organization, so you know what's really going on. And at the younger level, I think it's important too, because I've heard on shows that I've attended some webinars and some things that I've been involved with other organizations, how organizations are doing this. But just like we were talking about in that episode with Dr. DeForia, that it's important that at the pro levels they do it. When we talk about sports medicine, it's a collaboration between all that are part of that group. We have to do it at the younger level also. We have to start looking at, if I got a group of coaches, what are we doing? Let's take videos of the kids. Let's keep logs and records. Let's have them understand what we're looking for in movement. And parents, if your kids are not part of an organization, you can keep these things together as well. When you're getting these things that they're doing, understand it. Look at that clarity of what they're doing as far as their movement, if there's any breakdowns, if there's any pain. And when we get to that point of starting back, follow up with the family doctor. If there's team physicians, provide forms, coaches, to provide going over that before the start of the season. How active have you been? What have you done? Get an idea they are, and then start that assessment process, some of those screens at the beginning of the season. Because if we catch things early, we can prevent injury. And you know that if you have a healthy team, you have a competitive team. You have happy athletes. You have happy individuals that can enjoy the fun of playing sports. So let's look at that, grabbing those metrics of information. And the thing is that if you can get any conditioning work with athletes involved as well, get it, where you're looking at some basic running and some basic stretches and mobility and flexibility, because those things are very important in the beginning stages. So that's it for today. I wanted to really go over that. You want to do this at the end, like I'm saying. This is a slow and steady process as they transition into it. But if we can work together to make sure this is a smooth transition, we can decrease the chance of injuries and improve their optimal performance. Everyone, I always close out with take care and have a phenomenal week, and tune into our Friday's episode. Hey, everyone, visit our website at the dyanetwork.org for more information on ways to help the young athlete develop. And if you could do us a favor and leave us a rating or review, and please go out and share this episode, pass it along. We would really appreciate it. Until next time, remember, give 100% in life pursuing your dreams and never give up. Take care.